All right, so I don't want to dilly-dally at all. I want to use as much time as possible for this. So we're just going to jump into it. So for this recording, I'm going to walk through your first major drawing assignment as far as I can get to within the 2 hours I have. I'm probably not going to get to the complete finished drawing. So like when I lay out the doors and windows, I'm just going to leave them as like rough openings and not put in like all of the trim and stuff. I probably also am not going to have time to add in any annotations just for the sake of at least getting the major layouts done. So for that, you'll have to reference the student examples that I put up on As You Learn for you to be able to look at. So what I have here is the instruction sheet printed out, and then as I do some of the drawings, I'm going to put like the rough example up in the top corner in the recording, and as I go through my instructions, I'll just kind of highlight as I get things done so that this way we can make sure that we've hit every mark that we need to. I also probably am not going to get both elevations done in this recording, and that's just because I may not have time, but we'll see. So what I would recommend you do is watch this recording all the way through, maybe even put it on like double speed and watch it all the way through, and then you can go back and follow along with it and pause kind of as we go. I don't really think it would be a good idea to just follow along, pause without watching it through, purely because then you're not really going to get the understanding of why I'm doing things, because you're just going to be so focused on putting a line down, unpause, put a line down, unpause, and so on and so on. So I recommend you watch it all the way through, even if it is just on double speed, and then you can go back and use it as a guide to help you with your own work. But anywho, like I said, no dilly-dallying. So we are going to need 3 sheets of 11 by 17 bond paper. So bond paper is just computer paper or equivalent of tracing paper. And I recommend you do this on tracing paper. So I'm going to do my drawings on tracing paper. I'm actually going to start them out on graph paper though, and then transfer them over to the tracing paper. If you don't have 11 by 17 sheets of tracing paper, you can cut your roll down to size, or if you have, so like for graph paper, I couldn't find my pad of 11 by 17 graph paper, so I have 2 sheets of graph paper taped next to each other. Just kind of work with whatever you got. But we're going to create a floor plan, building section, elevations, we're going to make 2 of them, and an assembled isometric of a small story building. All of our drawings are going to be at a 1/4 inch equals a foot scale, except for if we skip ahead in the instructions quite a bit. For the isometric, you have the option to do it at a 1/4 inch or 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to do it at a 1/4 of an inch, but you ultimately do it however you feel comfortable. So we have all of kind of our design criteria and everything explained in the next 2 pages. So we'll start with sheet 1 or sheet A1, and we'll start with the floor plan. And the thing we need to remember about the floor plan is that for this drawing, north is on the top edge of the sheet. So when I do my annotations and I have my north arrow, north is just going to be facing that top edge. So this is going to be the north side of the building, which would make this the east side, the west side, the south side, and so on. For our floor plan, and also I can't remember if I said this already, but I am going to go kind of fast through this just because I do want to make sure I can get as far as possible. I'm going to talk my way through it and explain what I'm doing, but I'm going to try to go kind of fast in the drawings just because I know that you can rewind and pause when you need to. So the floor plan cut is 4 feet above the top of the floor deck. And what that pretty much means is that's just kind of a standard of if I have my building cut open and I'm looking inside of it, 4 feet from the top of the floor is where the building's getting cut open so we can see those interior spaces but we can also see then where all of the windows, all of the openings, all of the doors, we can still see all of those locations. And so we don't need to focus too much on that. It's just kind of that reference. In your finished version, you are going to hatch the walls using a solid fill pattern. And now I can get started with creating my drawings. So my building footprint is 24 feet by 12 feet. So the overall dimensions of my building is 24 by 12. The 24 dimension runs east to west, and the 12-foot dimension runs north to south. So that means my building is going to be with this longer side and then the shorter side. So I'm going to pick a place to start. That place seems as good as any. And I'll just draw a guideline out and a guideline up. And keep in mind, like, if you don't have the tools, and I know I've said this before, you can just use your graph. If your graph is set at a 1/4 inch graph, then each one of these boxes would be a foot. But I'm going to take my scale using the 1/4 inch side, and I'm going to measure 24 feet in one direction and 12 feet up. And then I'll just take some type of straight edge, draw a line across, and a line up. And so that box right there then is just the overall building footprint. Now keep in mind, it says in here that the building footprint is from the outside face of stud to the outside face of stud. That's going to be really important when we get into computer drawings. And we'll go over it next week when we go over framing stuff in a lot more detail. But for our hand drawings, it's not going to be too important just because we're not going to be able to get that extreme amount of detail in the hand drawings. And I'll talk about that in a moment. I've got the 24-foot dimension running east to west, 12-foot running north. The exterior walls follow the footprint dimensions. So for our exterior walls, we have what they're made up of material-wise. So they're not just one single thing, and they don't exist just as a line because that line doesn't show wall thickness. But our exterior walls are made up of, on the very outside, they're made up of 1x6 siding, then a 1/2 inch sheet of plywood, then a 2x6, and then a 1/2 inch sheet of gypsum wallboard. And now another thing too that you probably have gone over in 1708, but we'll make sure to hit on again next week when we do the framing stuff, is that dimensional pieces of lumber, like a 1x6 or a 2x6, they aren't actually 2 inches by 6 inches. They have a slight, to account for just shrinkage and just for cutting at the mill. So like a 2x6 is actually 1.5 by 5.5 inches thick. Not something to really focus on heavy right now, but just all of those materials combined give us a total thickness of 7.25 inches. Now, if we look at our 1/2 inch equals a foot scale, and I'll try to zoom it in. Oops, I hit the wrong thing. Nope, there we go. Whoa, that is really zoomed. Ew, you can see my gross finger now. So if I'm looking at the 1/4 inch equals a foot scale, every single one of those marks represents a singular inch, which means I'm not going to be able to show at this scale 7.25 inches thickness. So I'm just going to draw my walls as either 7 or 8 inches thick. Really, it's not going to matter too much which tick mark I go to, because like the thickness of my pencil point is pretty much the difference between 7 and 8 inches. So it's not going to really matter whether or not I draw to 7 inches or whether I draw to 8 inches. I just kind of want to be in that vicinity when I lay out the thickness for my walls. Let's refocus this. Here we go. So for my exterior walls, I'm going to take my 1/4 inch equals a foot scale, and I'm just going to measure 7 or 8 inches in on there. And now if you don't have, excuse me, if you don't have like a T-square and a triangle, if I just measure down there 7 or 8 inches in, and I measure up here, then I can just take my straight edge or a ruler and I can connect the dots. So it's the exact same thing, but I can just work a little bit faster if I have my tools, because instead of measuring twice, I just have to make that measurement once, and I can just bring that wall thickness down. But I'm going to measure on all of my sides, and because I'm just laying this out as like a general drawing that I then am going to transfer over, so this is not my like finished drawing at all. I'm not really going to worry about like erasing lines too much in this, because I'm going to take this and put it on tracing paper and make it nice and neat. So I don't have to worry about this version being all nice and pretty. And so now I have my exterior walls drawn. The next note is for how thick our interior partition wall is. And so you could see in my little example here, I have that interior wall and just the materials it's made out of. So it's made out of a 1/2 inch gypsum wallboard, a 2x4, and then a 1/2 inch gypsum wallboard. We're going to do that in a few steps later in this instruction, so I'm not going to highlight that just yet. I'm just going to kind of keep it there to keep a note of it. When we get on the computer, it is going to be important to know what all of these different materials are, because we are just going to make the same building on the computer. But for now, it's not going to be the end of the world. But our interior wall is 4.5 inches thick. So now I'm going to start framing out where my windows and my doors and openings may be. And so we can see that all windows and doors and openings are 3 feet wide. We have one door on the south wall, which, by the way, I forgot. So let me bring up that picture that I said I was going to put in the corner. And so that in the corner there is kind of what I'm going to be making. That's what's listed here in these instructions. But I have one door on the south wall that is located 4 feet from the outside face of stud on the east wall. And so I take my scale, and from the outside of the wall, I'm going to measure 4 feet in. And that's going to be the center of my door. And since my door is 3 feet wide, what I like to do is I like to measure, is to line up my scale with the 1.5 foot mark. And then I measure to 0 and 3. That's typically what I like to do, but however you want to do it is your own. And so that's the opening for my door. And I'm just going to make those lines kind of big, because that way they'll be easy for me to see when I go do my transferring to the tracing paper. And I can come in and even like erase this if I want to. And then I'll lay out for my door. So my door is going to be 3 feet, like in height. And it'll probably be about 2-ish inches in like thickness, but I usually just kind of wing that a little bit. And then what I had mentioned in our last demo about floor plans is that you can show a door as either like an arc of a swing, or you can just show it as that 45-degree line. I like to do that 45-degree line just because it's a little easier to draw in. And I would want my door to be hinged on this side, because that way as I open the door and I come in the building, if it was hinged on this side, I'd have to walk around the door to like get over here, versus when it's hinged on this side of the wall, it's only really just blocking off that small corner, which is just so it's just a good habit to have it hinged on in a corner where it's not really blocking a lot of stuff. And so I have my door. So I've got one door on the south side. The center line is 4 feet from the face of stud. I've got a 6 foot wide, 4 foot deep porch on the center of the door. So, based off of that door center, it's 6 feet wide. So I'm going to line my center up with 3 and then just measure to 0 and 6 to make a 6 foot wide porch. And how deep did it say? 4 feet deep. So I'm going to line up 4 feet on there and measure to 0. And then 2 6 foot wide, 1 foot deep steps on the south side of the porch. And so I'll just extend those lines down a little bit. I'm just going to take that measurement from 2 and make a mark at 1, make a mark at 0, and draw lines across. So I've got my porch set up. Oops, I just highlighted my hand. Okay. Locate 2 windows on the south facade, so this is still same side. The center line of the windows is 6 feet from the face of the west stud wall. So, and my little stand is in the way, but from the very outside of the wall, I'm going to measure 6 feet in. And I've got that line done. And there is a 6-inch spacer between the 2 windows. So, what I like to do is then just measure 3 inches in one direction, 3 inches in the other one. And then my windows themselves are 3 feet wide because all of our openings are 3 feet in width. Okay, so I've got that 6-inch spacer. I've got my windows framed out. I'm not going to add the details for them in just yet because I'm going to add those in later when I transfer it onto the tracing paper. So next is to locate 1 window on the north facade, so on the north wall, directly opposite the door on the south. So this is where having those guidelines is really handy, because rather than drawing this all the way up, I can just line up my straight edge and I could just transfer those measurements over. And so now I have that wall framed out, or that window rather, located without having to measure 4 feet over and then measure 1.5 feet out, 1.5 feet out. Could I? Absolutely. But I want to do a little bit less work. Don't know about you. Okay. I've got my window on the north wall. Now I've got 1 window on the east facade. Center line of window is 4 feet from the outside of the north wall. So again, I'm going to line up my 0 with the outside edge, measure 4 feet in, and then measure 1.5 feet out in each direction. And so for me, I like to line it up at the 1.5 foot mark and then measure to 0 and 3. And just kind of mark out where the edges of that window would be. And I've got one window on the east facade, 4 feet from the outside of the north wall. This isn't double-sided. Next is one window on the west facade directly opposite the window of the east facade. So again, rather than measure a lot, I can just line up my straight edge and just transfer that measurement over. And I'm actually going to bring that line all the way through, just because I know for annotating I'll need a center line there to help show the symmetry between all these. And so to have that guide there just already going through is going to be nice and helpful. Okay. Now we're on to the interior partition. So we have one interior partition wall running north to south, so running up this way. And the center line of the wall is to be the center of the east to west exterior. So what that's saying is directly in the middle of this building is the center of that partition. So I'm going to line up my 0 with one of these outside edges and just make a little mark at 12. Now my interior partition has a thickness of 4.5, which means that I can draw this wall to be about either 4 or 5 inches in thickness. And so I'm just going to line it up and measure about 2 inches out in each direction. And then draw a line straight up, or draw 2 lines straight up to represent that interior partition. I know I'm moving fast, but the faster I move, the more I can cover. And then while you're watching it back, while you're doing it, you can always pause me. Then there's one cased opening, or a door without a doorway without a door in it, in the interior partition. And before I throw that away, the cased wall opening aligns with the windows on the east and west exterior walls. So this opening is also 3 feet wide, and it has that same center. So I can just borrow measurements without having to actually measure where that door goes. I could, of course, measure 4 feet down from the outside and I could find that door, but I want to try to work a little faster. And I now have the floor plan laid out as a kind of just rough sketch. Now, I could go in with an eraser and try to clean it up quite a bit, but my method, or my preferred method of working, would be to take a piece of tracing paper, put it over this, and not have to worry about cleaning it up too much. So I have some tracing papers here already cut to 11 by 17. The thing you want to keep in mind is on your final version, you're going to have the floor plan and the section view on one sheet. So you want to make sure that you're leaving enough room on that final product for the section view. You want to make sure you're leaving enough room for like your border and your title block. So there is a copy of the title block page up on As You Learn, and if you want to and you have access to a printer that can print on 11 by 17 paper, you can just print that title block out. Otherwise, you can just use it as a reference and just draw your own in. Typically, it's about 1/2 inch in on each side, and then your title block over here is usually about 1 inch or 1.5 inches in thickness. Sometimes too, for like sheets like this, where it's a bit of a smaller piece of paper, we might only go 1/4 inch in on each side. I'm not going to lay my title block out just because, again, for the sake of time, I want to make sure that I can get as much done as possible. The other thing I want to think about too is I still would need to add in like my view title and a graphic scale at the bottom of the view. I would need to put in different dimensions. So I want to try to make sure I'm leaving myself enough room for it. And I'll do it about just like that. That seems to be like a good enough place to put it. If you don't have your T-square, or don't own a T-square, rather than don't have one, what I'm just doing is lining up like the line of my graph paper with the edge of my sheet. So rather than lining up the sheet with the T-square, I'm just checking it to make sure that it's in line with the graph paper. And I'm just taping down my corners, so that way as I trace over this to make my final product, my page doesn't move. Now, some notes in here. So we added in on our interior partition. We've got all of our windows and doors with everything the same width. Really, the only note in this floor plan that I didn't highlight yet is this hatch here. So hatch the plan cut or hatch the walls using a solid fill pattern. And so that's another reason why I could not worry necessarily about how my corners overlap. We don't want to show those line works of the corners overlapping. But in this scenario, since I'm just going to fill them in with a solid hatch pattern, it really wouldn't matter too much. The thing you have to keep in mind with a solid hatch is that your line work still going around the edge should be thicker. So you just kind of want to make sure that it's always just a good practice to keep those corners and edges nice. The same thing too of where your windows are. Typically the line work representing the windows is just lighter or is a lighter line weight than what's representing the walls. And that's because if we're making this imaginary cut and I'm cutting through the building at 4 feet, I can still see that bottom edge of the window, but it's not directly on the cut line like the walls are. And so we usually show it with just a little bit of a lighter line. And I apologize too if my big fat head gets in the way of the camera at any time. It might have already happened, but I'm just going to kind of go in with a darker line and then a little bit less line pressure, darker, less line pressure, darker, less line pressure. Actually, that's a door, so I should put no line there. Though there are some people with exterior doors, they put like a little jet out there. I don't. So maybe I'm just doing things the illegal way. And also, I don't know why I'm starting at the bottom, because usually when I trace over things, I like to start at the top. That way I don't smudge over them. But so I'm just going to go darker across the wall, and then when I get to the window, I'm still going to trace over it, but I just don't press as hard. So if I put just a sheet of bond paper underneath it, that line's still there, it's just not as dark as the rest of it. Harsh. And now for this interior wall, I'm just going to, instead of starting all the way at that end, I'm just going to start here. Which, whoops, I just saw my big fat head was in the way. Stop at the window, a little bit lighter, continue on. And I'll just put my little edges for my window. So like I said, I tend to work my way from the top down and from one side to another one, just to try to prevent myself from smudging too much. especially because I really like to do drawings using this vellum paper, this plasticky paper, and it smudges really easily. Whoops, I went over those windows real harsh. I was talking too much and I didn't even listen to my own advice. And vellum also does not erase very well, as you're probably going to see in a moment. Lighter, darker. And so the nice thing with tracing over your drawings is that you don't have to worry about erasing a whole lot of the line work. And features like your doors too, they shouldn't have a very thick line for your floor plan. Your thickest lines should really be the perimeters or all of your walls. Those should be the thickest lines that show up on your page. Because I'm using just a plain old regular Ticonderoga pencil, it may be a little harder to see the difference between line weights. So that's where things like having B pencils and H pencils come in handy. I didn't want to do this in an H pencil because then you wouldn't be able to see my line work at all, really. And I also kind of wanted to just show you, you know, like you can do this with just whatever you have on hand. If you don't have a bunch of drafting pencils, you can be okay. And so, come on, please go under page. And so I did a bit better of a job in some spots than others, but having kind of some control over your line weights really helps. Now for windows, we do want to show those edges there, and then to signify like the pane of glass, we'll just usually put a line down the middle. I often just wing that line. I know that that's kind of a no-no, but I usually just kind of measure towards the middle and wing it. And the more practice you have at it, the better you kind of get. Duh. I just gave you the most obvious advice possible. Now for our cased opening, our hole in the wall there, we're actually going to want to show that with a hidden line. So I could draw a line through and then erase it to be hidden, or I could use an eraser shield to make it into a hidden line. What I'm going to do, just to really help make sure my drawing stays nice and clean, is I'm going to add just that hidden line in by just leaving little gaps as I go. You want to try to keep them even, and so once I move my triangle, I'll show you. So see how I kind of have it where they all end at the same spot, end at the same spot, end at the same spot. And you also want to make sure that whatever's touching like the edge of the doorway is always like a line. You don't leave that space part of the hidden line directly against that door edge. Some other references too that, oops, I forgot my porch. Whoops. And so this is why I prefer just kind of doing it on graph paper or doing it on tracing paper and then putting my final version on just a new sheet. It's way easier to get that really nice clean line work without having to put in as much of an effort. And I'll also add in, just because I know I'm going to need it as like an annotation reference later, I'm going to put a center line, which is a long, short, long, short, long, short, long, through those windows and doors, and this window and door here. And what this is just going to allow me to do is when I go and add in dimensions for it, which as I said, I'm probably not going to have time to put dimensions in the drawing, but if I were to go add dimensions in, I would really only have to dimension to just this one window or just this one window, and I wouldn't have to put a dimension for where this door is and where the other window is, because that shows me that there's symmetry between them, which means however far down this one is also how far down this is, and also how far down this is. And that would then be my floor plan set up. I didn't do any of the hatching, and I didn't do any of the annotations. I may, if we have time at the end of this, I don't know how long or how fast I'll work, but if I have time, I may go back and add some of those in, or maybe I'll record them as like a bonus video. If you'd like that, let me know. But I have my floor plan, all nice and clean from that. And I'll just put this off to the side because I'm going to transfer my section view over to here once I create that. And so let me switch the picture in the corner over before I forget. Okay. And I'll start on the section view. So for the section, we'll still have parts of this floor plan that we're going to reference. So like, for example, how thick like the exterior walls are. And then we have some notes here as well. So our section cut is going through one of the two south-facing windows, and it looks towards the west. So in that example picture I had up in the corner, and I have it printed somewhere on my desk. Here it is. Whoops. So that's what this line right here is. So this is this section cut, and the arrow is pointing that way to say that it's looking towards this west wall. And that's then what we're kind of seeing in the corner with just one tiny little uh-oh in it, which we'll address in a moment. And so that is then what our section would look like. So if I've cut my building open and I'm just looking at it from that view, I'm able to see the west wall. Because I'm cutting directly through one of those windows, I'm able to see like some parts of the frame of that window, and I can see my foundation and my footing, which Wednesday's lecture kind of goes over that stuff in a bit more detail, but hopefully you have an okay understanding of what the foundation and footing is from 1708. So it goes through one of the two windows. You can choose whichever window you want. I'm going to do it through the middle of that window. We would hatch our section cut, so the walls, floor, and roof using a solid fill hatch pattern. The foundation and wall footing it's an 8-inch wide foundation wall and 2 foot 8 inches tall, made up out of CMUs, supported by a 2 foot wide, 1 foot deep, cast in place concrete. So we'll need to keep in mind or look up on as you learn what those hatch patterns for this CMUs and the concrete are, because it doesn't say to hatch that with a solid fill. The finish grade, so that's where's the ground line, is 6 feet below the top of the foundation wall, and the frost line should be 2 feet below that finish grade. So the foundation I'm going to come back to kind of last actually, and I'm going to start with just creating like the floor system, the wall height, the roof, and like where the walls and windows and stuff are located. So where did I put my pencil? Here it is. It doesn't really necessarily matter where we start it. I'm just going to start it over here because I am just going to transfer it onto that finish sheet. But since I'm looking at it from this side, it would be 12 feet from one edge to another. And so that's what I'm first going to establish 12 feet. And line up as just guidelines. And that's, again, having a 1/4 inch grid is really helpful for that. Next is for our floor system, which is also made out of 2 pieces of material. So on the top of the floor, we just have plywood sheathing, and then it's on 2x8 floor joists, which, because this is dimensional lumber, that's not its actual dimension, but we're not going to dwell on that too much today. We'll go over it next week, like I said, but our floor is 8 inches total. So from this initial line that I measured, this is like the bottom of my floor system. And so I'm going to take my scale and I'm going to measure 8 inches up and just draw a line across. And highlight, because I did it. Now for my exterior wall height, on the west side of the building, it's 8 feet above the top of the floor deck. So from that line that I measured for the top of the floor, I'm going to measure 8 feet up, draw a line across, and that is the lowest point of my roof. Now, one thing we have to keep in mind is, if we read forward, that's not exactly like where this part of our drawing of our roof kind of starts. And that's what, in that little picture, it's just slightly wrong. So our roof is a shed style roof, which means that it has a single slope. It's just sloping so if this is my south side with my door, my roof just slopes up. Because it says right here, the roof slope is to be 312 starting at the west wall and rising towards the east wall. So that means that the slope is for every 3 feet we go up, we go 12 feet over. 3 feet up, 12 feet over, and then we're at our other side because our building is 24 feet. So while I'm 8 feet right here, if this is my bank of windows that I'm cutting through, I am not at 8 feet right there, that far over in my window. So what I need to figure out is how far up is the roof as I've traveled over that far. Like, how far up did it climb? And so while I tend to think of the slope as how many feet do you go up versus how many feet over, you can also think of it in inches. So I could just do it in smaller increments and I could get to the same end result, which is what we'll have to do just to figure out how far up that goes. So if we measure to the center of that window in our scale, because I don't know exactly how far over that is, but let me make sure I keep this on here too. It is 4 feet over from the outside. So if this is 8 feet tall, 1 foot over would be 8 foot 3 inches. Or, 1 foot over would be 8 foot 3 inches. 2 foot over would be 8 foot 6. 3 feet over would be 8 foot 9. And 4 feet over would be 9 feet tall, or just 1 foot up from that initial height. Let me double check my math, just because I'm not a math teacher, kids. So 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, 4 foot. Yes. Okay. Sorry. So that means then for the start of my roof line, while that's my ceiling height, I'm going to measure 1 foot up from that, and that's going to be the start of my roof. And my roof is also made out of several different materials. So on the very outside or the very top of my roof is 3/4 inch metal roofing, then 3/4 inch plywood sheet, then 2x8 rafters, and then my gypsum wallboard ceiling. What we need to remember is that the overall thickness of that roof is 9 1/4, or about 9 inches in our scale. So I'm going to measure up 9 inches and draw a line across. And so that would be kind of depicting what we see in here in this 3D model, where that's our 8 foot. But as it was traveling across the building, the roof was getting slightly higher. And then those dashed lines that you see up there are representing the roof at its ultimate final height once it reaches the east wall. It's not in our view currently, but it still would have to be there. And so we've got that. I'm going to leave this part open because I'm going to need that. Sorry. I'm going to need that for the elevation part of my drawing. And then we'll move on to adding in our windows. So because we're cutting our building open through this window, we're able to see this back part of the frame in this view. And actually, before we get to that part, we're going to have to show our wall thickness. Sorry, I'm a little scrambled right now. And so we established that our exterior walls had a thickness of 7 1/4, which we're just going to draw as like 7 inches or 8 inches in thickness. So I'm just going to measure in about 7 inches, 7 inches, and then just draw some lines straight up because I need to show the thickness of my walls before I can actually add the window into this wall on this side. And so our window, all windows, all doors, all openings are they have a header 6 foot 8 inches above the top of the floor. So what I'm going to do is line up my 8-inch mark with the top of the floor and measure to 6. And I'm going to make a little note there. And just so I don't have to measure again for this window back here, I'm just going to bring that line over. And then 2 foot above the top of the floor is the sill height. And so I'm going to make a little note, bring that over, just so I don't have to measure it twice. And next is for where this window is located. And so we established if this is the south wall, this would be the north wall. And so it's centered 4 feet in. And then I'm just going to measure a 1.5 feet out in each direction. 1, 2, 3, which would just be 3 of these total tick marks because every one of these smaller ones is technically 1/2 inch. And line up, and line up. And so that then is just the rough opening of my window. It's not adding in any of the other parts or pieces of it, like the frame and the trim. But I'm probably not going to have time in these recordings because I'm already 50 minutes in and I still have elevations and an isometric to do. So I'm probably not going to add in those trim details, but you can reference the finished drawings and like these examples to help see what those trims look like. Okay, now for our foundation wall. So our foundation wall is 8 inches wide and 2 feet 8 inches deep. So from the floor edge, I'm just going to draw some guidelines straight down. And I'm going to measure 2 foot 8 inches down and just kind of draw some references for that. And then they are 8 inches thick, so I'll measure 8 inches in. And they may look like they line up with your walls here, just because these are 7 inches and these are 8 inches. They just kind of, I mean, that's a very close measurement, especially at this scale. So don't worry if they look exact, or maybe that yours look too thick. So I've got my 8 inch wide, 2 foot tall CMU wall, and it's supported by a 2 foot wide, 1 foot deep footing. So in the next lecture, I go over foundations and footings in some detail, but our footing is sitting directly centered on the bottom of our foundation. So if it's 2 feet wide, what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure 4 inches in to find where the center of that is. And then I'm just going to line it up with the 1 foot mark and measure to 0 and 2. Find 4 inches in, measure to 0 and 2, or, whoops. Almost made it a little bit too big. And I didn't even have my T-square flat against my desk, so it came out real wonky. And then I'll measure 1 foot in depth for our footing. Okay, so now within all of these guidelines, and some students really don't like leaving all of their guidelines like as long as kind of how I do when I make my drawings, which I guess it is just a little bit of preference and also just getting used to looking at a drawing and laying a drawing out. So when I see this, I can completely understand what's happening with it. But it's also just out of years and years and years of laying drawings out, those guidelines start to become a little bit more familiar. So if you want to kind of erase guides as you go, that's fine. Do it how you need to do it. Whatever works best for you. So then I've got my 2 foot wide footing, and now my finished grade, or the ground line, is 6 inches below the top of the CMU foundation. And so again, I'm just going to measure from the top of the foundation wall 6 inches down. And I could, once again, if you don't have your tools, like if you don't have a T-square, that's fine, just measure 6 inches on both sides. And then you just take a ruler and connect the dots. The T-square is just kind of to help that you only have to take that measurement once and then just bring it across. And the frost line is 2 foot below the finished grade line. So let me move that little model. 2 foot below the finished grade line is going to be where our frost line is going to be. And so like your frost line and stuff, and I'm also going to bring these all the way across. Your frost line and your grade line, when you transfer everything over, they should be the thickest lines on your entire page. They should have the heaviest line weights. Okay. Now let's just double check. I've got this. I've got this. I've got my roof slope. I don't want to highlight it. I'll highlight it anyway. What I didn't do a gutter yet on the west side, so actually I'll leave that unhighlighted. I've got my frost line. I didn't do my hatching. I always think it's a good idea to, even if you just highlight like the PDF, to just highlight the assignment as you go, to just make sure that you're hitting all the points that you need to hit. And so now I'm ready to transfer it over onto my nice, clean, final version of the drawing. Because the floor plan and the section are like two kind of separate views, so this floor plan is a top view. This would be kind of like a side view or an elevation almost if it wasn't a section. We don't have to worry about aligning the views like we would with the elevations. So when you do the elevations, you want to make sure that the ground line in the south view and the east view are lined up with each other. In this case, we don't have to worry about that too much. However, what I always think kind of looks a little nicer is when you have a section view and a floor plan, is to align like or even to do it with the ground line, is to align your ground line with like the bottom edge of the building. And so I'm just lining it up so that way the ground line would be in line with the bottom edge of the building. And what I'm also going to do, because I do know that that's going to bug the bejesus out of some of you guys, sorry, I'm still just a little confused at why the police came in on me. Partly because I'm here every weekend filming videos, and so I don't know why this weekend out of any of them I had a gun pointed at me, but hey. How great is online learning, kids? And so since I know that's going to bug you that it's not lined up, I'll just put that underneath it so you don't have to see it. And so now I can start to transfer over my line work. And so again, I like to kind of just work my way from the top down. And when it comes to things like my windows and openings, I'm going to leave them just as rough cuts. I don't want you to do that, but I'm just not going to have the time to finish them. And so then this is my ground line, which should be really heavy ground line, really heavy frost line. Kind of lighter line for this back part of the footing. And so let me just finish off that footing part and I'll explain why. So line weights in sections are similar to like the floor plan, where it's based on kind of what was in direct contact with the cut that you were making. And so this part of the foundation footing is lighter because these parts right here, these little like upside down T's, which is also why we tend to call this a T-sill foundation, these are directly in line with that cut. As I cut through the building, it's in line with it. So that's why we want those with a pretty heavy line to them. This part back here is still part of our drawing, but it's just beyond, or it's like behind what we're cutting. So we would just have it as kind of lighter. And the same thing then with this window. That's why when I put this window in, I didn't really give it very heavy lines, because it's still there, it's still visible, but it's just not directly on the line where I'm making my cut for the building. The sun keeps like going away and it's making my lighting all weird and I can't see what I'm doing well. Oh, woe is me, kids. And then the same thing with that window. Is this window, it's that part of the frame's behind the cut, so I can't necessarily see it. Or I can't, it's not on my cut, but I can still see it, so I would have it there drawn, but just not with as heavy as a line weight. Controlling your line weights with pencils, particularly if you're not using drawing pencils, can be really difficult. Sorry about that. Can be difficult to do. On the computer, it's so incredibly easy to do, though. And so, I've got my section view done. I would have to add in that last part up here for the height of my walls as they travel upward more, or my roof rather, as it travels upward. And so I can do that math right now. And a lot of times also, I'll find myself kind of untaping like corners or like halves of the drawing, working it out on here, and then just transferring it over. I'm just going to do it directly here on the paper, just to save some time. So if I have a slope of I go up 3 feet for every 12 feet I go over, and I have an overall building height, or overall building length, excuse me, of 24, that means if I start over here, by the time I get to the other end, I've done 2 full slope cycles, or I've gone up 6 feet. Because going over 12, I would have gone up 3, another 12, I go up another 3, or I go up 6. So that means on this end, we are 6 feet above this initial height. And so, I take my scale, I'm going to line up the 6 on that initial one and measure to 0. And I'm going to make my dashed lines going across. Because I already kind of have some guidelines there for my initial one, so I don't have to worry too much about making those measurements. And now, of course, I still would have to do my hatch patterns and like the frame and everything for my window, for the window that's on the west wall, not this window. This window is essentially done. But for this window back here, I would have to add in like the trim and stuff. But I've got my section view pretty much completed. As far as the layout goes, I still have annotations and things that I would need to put in. But like I said, in order for me to make sure I get all of the drawings laid out, I'm just going to skip those for now. Because this project, if this takes you just an hour and 50 minutes or 2 hours to do this project, then by golly, you're a miracle worker. This is not a 2-hour long project for you guys. That's why it's one of the big projects and why you have about 20 days, I think, to get it done. Or no, you have less than 20 days to get it done. About 2 weeks to get it done. Okay, so now I'm going to lay out an elevation view, and I'm actually going to show you how I typically do elevation views, where to save time and measurement, I'm going to use this as a reference for my elevation. And I'm just going to do it on the back of this sheet too to save some paper. So the first thing I'm going to do is tape my pages down, I'm going to just make sure that my T-square is nice and lined up with the graph paper. If you're not using a T-square, then I guess you can kind of skip that step and just tape down your blank sheet. And then move that out of the way. And then what I'm going to do is just make sure that like the graph lines line up with each other on these two sheets. So I'm just making sure that like the vertical lines on my blank sheet are lining up with this floor plan. And I'm just going to tape that floor plan down in place. So I'm going to draw the south side of my building. So that's why I have it facing this direction, so that way I can just see the features of the south side. And I can, instead of measuring everything out, all I've got to do is just take some type of straight edge and just transfer like my overall length measurement straight down. And rather than measuring out 24 feet, I now have 24 feet. And so that's how I would do it if I didn't have the tools. If I had the tools, I of course would put my triangle on top of my T-square. And the same thing then with like my window sides, is I would just line up to where the edge of my window is, transfer that down, line up the edge of my window, transfer that down, line up the edge of my window. So rather than measure out where my windows are, rather than measure out where my door is, I can just get all of those measurements rather quickly for my elevation view. And so it's kind of the same as, if we were doing like that orthographic where I said, hey, it's a really good idea to align all of your edges, because now I don't have to take any measurements for it. Or I've taken any measurements regarding those lengths. I'm still going to have to do measurements regarding heights. But I could even then take like my section view, and if I had like my section view, which is on the back of this actually, but I could then kind of align based off of, okay, if that's going to be the bottom of my floor, I could just align that next to it, and I could get all of my sill heights and my roof and everything with kind of a minimal amount of effort. But I'm going to actually just measure those out for this. Got too many pages flying around here. Okay. So if this is the bottom of my floor, I need to measure up for the top of my floor, which we said that the floor system is 8 inches thick in total. Oops, let me change that picture in the corner. Okay, so that's kind of what we're making here. And I'm going to measure up 8 inches. And draw a guide across. And then I'll measure up 8 feet for my overall ceiling height. I'll measure up 2 feet for my windowsill height. And then I'm going to align, instead of aligning with the 0 at the top of the floor, I'm going to align the 8 inches, and I'll measure to 6. And so that then is my header height, and then this 2 feet would be my sill plate, which I'll just bring across there, and I'll have to bring these down a little bit more. Now, and I'll have to bring my door down a lot more. But hey, at least I didn't have to measure it. Now, since this is my 8 foot at my west wall, and we established that for every 3 feet I go up, I go 12 feet over, 3 feet up, 12 feet over, which means at this side, I'm 6 feet up. I'm just going to measure up 6 feet. And then it's just a game of connect the dots for what that slope would be. And then my roof thickness is 9 1/4. So I'm going to measure 9 inches up, because remember, you're not going to be able to get that 1/4 of an inch at this scale. When we jump onto the computer, that 1/4 of an inch will matter, but in this scenario, it certainly doesn't. And I'm just going to connect the dots. And I have the thickness of my roof. I need to also transfer over my steps, or my porch here. So I'm just going to line up like a ruler or a straight edge, and just all the way across for my porch. Right? Yep, it just doesn't look like it's centered. Did I mess my porch up? No, I guess it is just 2 boxes away on each side. About 2 boxes. And now my ground line, again, is 6 inches. We know from the section view that our ground line is 6 inches underneath the top of the floor. So this is my ground line, which means there's just a little bit of exposed foundation happening there. And for my porch, what I need to do is figure out this height, the steps, the height of each step. So we have our 8-inch thick floor with our 6 inches of exposed foundation until the ground line. So all together, that is 14 inches, right? I'm not a math teacher, kids. I teach drafting, and it's very obvious. But yeah, 14 inches. And so I'm getting out a calculator, but I'm pretty sure that's 4 inches per step. Nope, that's definitely not. The answer it gave me was 6,000, so yeah. So it's about 4.5 inches per step. We're not going to be able to see that 1/2 inch. So since we have that porch plus the 2 steps, we're going to do about 4-ish inches for each of those. So about 4, and then we'll be at the ground. Now I can take it over to a fresh piece of tracing paper and have my final cleaned version. So once again, I got to keep in mind that I'm going to be drawing my east elevation kind of over here, or maybe I would put it over here if I were you. It would make more sense to have it here and then flipped to here, but so I want to make sure that I'm keeping enough room for that east elevation on it. So when I go to tape my tracing paper on here nice and straight, I'm just going to align the edges with the edge of the graph paper. I'm kind of off to the side. You go through a lot of tape as a drafter. I don't know what to tell you kids. And I'll just tape down my tracing paper on top of my drawing. And then I can take, and here I'll use just this. And I can trace over my line work to make the nice, neat, finished product without having to really go through erasing. Now, my ceiling height going across here is going to be done with a hidden line, or a dashed line. So rather than going through and erase it, I'm just going to put it in as I go. And my header heights, my sill for my windows, which should be a little bit lighter than your other line work, just because the overall building should be the thickest. And you'd also probably want these lines, or you should have these dash lines kind of meeting up. They should be aligned with each other. I didn't do a good job of that. The bottom of my building, then the overall ground line, and then, sorry, I just realized my big fat head could have gotten in the way of some of those. I really should be working from this side over, so that way I don't smudge anything, or I'm less likely to smudge, really. And again, I'm not gonna, just for the sake of time to make sure I can lay out the isometric for you guys, I'm not gonna be putting in any of the details and stuff regarding the window trim and the door and all of the annotation marks. If you have questions about those, absolutely reach out to me, and I'll typically, with questions regarding drawing stuff, I just respond with a video demo of how you would handle it. But I'm not going to be able to fit it in this video. How much time am I at? I'm at 1 hour 20 minutes. And so to make sure that I've got time to do my isometric view, I'm not going to add in adding in the hatching and stuff here. But without having to take any of those measurements for, come on, please come up. Thank you. For that view, I just had to do some height measurements, but not really all too much related to measuring out where all the windows and doors would go. I can actually use that same technique too for making my east elevation, especially now, because for the east elevation I have, oops, come on, come up please. Oops, I ripped it. For my east elevation, I already have all of these heights measured out for this one. And so what I could do is tape a fresh piece of graph paper over here, lay out my floor plan this way, and tape it down. And then with my fresh piece of graph paper, I can just transfer over all of these measurements regarding the heights onto it, all of these measurements down, kind of like the miter line technique from making orthographics. So I'm just transferring all of those measurements over without really having to go and measure anything out myself. But I'm just not going to have time to do that today, which is what I kind of expected, so it's okay. Now, for doing an isometric view. So typically when I do this project, I have students do what's called an exploded isometric, which kind of shows the building